Hello Wargamers and welcome to Let's Get Critical. My name is Gar. In this video I'll be showing you how we painted the Killzone upgrade Tyranid Infestation that came in the Kill Team Typhon box set. The Critically Quick series of painting guides has been designed to show you the colours that we chose and the techniques that we used when painting our models for the battle reports on our channel. If you'd like to see how we achieve this look for our Tyranid Infestation, then please sit back, relax, and let's get painting. The first colour that I used was a Citadel spray colour and it's called White Scar. These are the models I chose to paint after they had been primed, and this one here is the Gestation Sac. It has some great details on it. It has sort of like a fleshy pod containing some nurturing Tyranids, and it's all held in place by a claw-like structure, and it has a centerpiece made of the carapace armor going over the top. This is one of my favorite pieces out of the terrain set. And next we have this one here. This is called the Capillary Tower. It's got lots of great features. It has this carapace armor running up the side of it, and on the front here it has some kind of alien fleshy parts, and at the back you can see the spore vents coming out, which look great fun to paint as well. And finally we get to the last piece, which is called the spore vent. It's a nice piece that I think looks fun to paint, so I decided to go with that. And these are the three pieces here. After they were sprayed, I moved on and began painting, and the first colour will be coming up next. The next paint I'll be using is a Citadel colour. It's a layer paint and it's called Fulgrim Pink. And for the brush, I'll be using a Citadel medium dry brush. For the first painting step, I'm going to a dry brush all over the fleshy parts of these models. Dry brushing is a fantastic technique to learn, and I use it nearly all the time when I'm painting. I'm not sure if you've watched any of my other painting videos, but I'll quickly run through the process for dry brushing. The first thing you need to do is just to make sure the bristles of the brush are clean and that they're damp, and obviously that they're ready to be used. And then you need to apply just a really small amount of paint onto the end of the brush, just like this. Then what you need to do is work the paint into the bristles. Here I'm using a palette. I picked it up from the local hobby store, and you just work the paint into those bristles. And next you need to use a piece of kitchen towel to remove most of the paint off the bristles. And finally you're left with a brush which has got quite large bristles with relatively no paint on them at all. And then finally all you need to do is start gently flicking that brush over the areas that you want to dry brush the colour onto. Here you can see that I'm concentrating mainly on the fleshy areas of the Gestation Sac. Now the detail on these areas is absolutely brilliant, and the Fulgrim Pink colour, it's really making all those alien details stick out. But after a while you need to reload the brush, and you do so just following the same steps as before. You add the paint, you work it onto the bristles, and then you take the excess off on the kitchen roll. This model is getting quite a heavy dry brush, and for a highlight dry brush you would spend more time removing excess paint from the bristles, but as I want the pink to be very noticeable, I'm only using the kitchen paper to remove the bulk of the paint, and then I'm going round and round in circular motions. And as you can see here, you know, I'm really working the bristles of that brush over the fleshy areas to really make that pink stand out and come to life. Here you can see here from this video that you can see that this is what it looks like when one side of the model was complete, and here you can see it after both sides had been complete and they both had a dry brush. I'm starting the dry brush on the fleshy parts at the front of this model. I'm not overly bothered at all about getting some of the pink colour onto the carapace parts of the model because I'll be painting over those anyway. I'm just using the bristles to add the colour until I'm happy, and then I'm moving on to the spore vents at the back. I worked my way up and down the outsides of each of the spore vents until I got to the last ones, and then I loaded the brush up again, and then I moved on to the outside edges. I dry brushed these quite quickly because they're going to get painted over anyway. And then after the dry brush was complete, this is what the Capillary Tower looks like now. Next, it's onto the spore vent. The spore vent has a very large fleshy piece here at the top of the model above the carapace. Like with the other steps, I just kept dry brushing and I just kept adding paint slowly and building up the colour until I was happy. And here is the model at the end. All of the dry brush has now been completed, and it's now on to the next colour. The next colour I'll be using is a Citadel layer paint, and it's called Pink Horror, and for the brush I'll be using the Citadel small dry brush. In this section I will be stippling the new colour onto the model. Now, stippling is a technique that involves dabbing the paint onto the area to give it a kind of partially covered random effect, and I use it to add a variety of different colours and to stop the model looking boring. When stippling, it's very similar to dry brushing. You need to add just a small amount of paint onto the end of the brush. You then work that paint into the bristles, and then you use the palette and the kitchen roll to remove the excess paint, and then you just have to start dabbing it onto the model, dabbing it onto the areas that you want to apply the colour. Here you can see these carapace sections rising like claws containing the fleshy parts of the gestation sac. What I want to do is to gently apply the new Pink Horror colour into these areas. I'm aiming the brush to kind of hit both the fleshy parts and just the carapace as well, sort of like a 50-50 mix onto those painted areas. Essentially, I just want to go round all of the models, targeting the areas where the carapace meets the flesh. And just like with dry brushing, you have to be very, very careful not to apply too much paint, and you have to slowly build up the colour until you're happy. This is what the model looked like when I decided that I'd applied enough of the Pink Horror colour. Next, I moved on to the Capillary Tower. For the Capillary Tower, it was exactly the same process as before. I concentrated the stippling here at the front where the fleshy parts meet the carapace. I slowly worked my way up to the top, being careful, and then I did the same on the other side before moving around to the spore vents at the back. The spore vent here has lots of the carapace connecting to the flesh. It's all the way around the whole of the model. I stippled all of it, and again I just gently built up the Pink Horror colour until I was satisfied with the way it looked. It's so easy to apply too much paint and ruin things for yourself. You just have to be really careful and go slowly. And this is what the spore vent looks like now that I've finished. I'm happy here. I think it looks great. It's time to move on to the next colour. The next colour I'll be using is a Citadel base paint called Naggaroth Night, and for the brush I'll be using an old regiment brush from the army painter. For this next part I'll be stippling again, but this time I want to stipple over the carapace section and build up the colour there until it's about 95% covered. The reason I'm stippling instead of just painting it normally is because when it comes to shading the model later on, I'll get a much better effect if it's been stippled. Painting it and then shading it will lead to the colour looking flat and dull. While I was stippling this colour onto the model, I needed to be much more careful about getting it onto the flesh. I wanted to try and keep all of the paint on the carapace there, and I did my very best, you know, to be very, very slow and very, very careful when applying the paint. I had to get the model into some awkward positions to paint these claw-like sections, but I just persevered and I carried on until they were all completed. After these parts were painted, I moved on to the carapace running over the centre of the model. For the carapace that runs over the centre of the model, I switched my brush to the small dry brush from the army painter. It has a flat angled head on it, and it was much easier to get to the gaps in between the crevices. After I'd finished, this is what the model looks like now. You can hopefully see all the patches of white that the stippling's left behind, and these are done intentionally so that when it's shaded later on in the video, it will make the sections look more colourful and a lot less dull. But next I moved on to the Capillary Tower. For the tower piece, I started with these parts here where the carapace meets the fleshy insides. I went up the sides all the way to the top, carefully using just the tip of the brush, And then I switched position, and then I did the same on the other side, again just being as careful as I could not to get any onto the flesh. It was quite tricky. And once I'd done the edges, I moved on around the back of the model, and I concentrated on the areas here between the spore vents, and again very slowly I just stippled on the purple colour until I was happy. After I'd done the backs, I got a bit more quick now, and I was a bit heavier, and I just started filling out the rest of the model as quickly as I could. When I'd finished, this is what it looks like. And as you can see, you know, just before I changed to the spore vent, there's plenty of the white showing. I've done that intentionally when I stipple because I want the shade, you know, to go through there later on in the video. But that's the capillary tower done. I don't want to go through it all, you know, so I'll just take you right to the end. But for the spore vent, I just stippled all the way around the bottom of the model. And then when I was happy, I just moved on to the next colour, which will be coming up right now. The next colour I chose to use is a Citadel base paint, and it's called Daemonette Hide. And for the brush, I'll be using a Citadel small dry brush. And now I'm going to be very quickly just stippling another purple colour over the purple colour that I've just used before. I'm doing this to add variation, and hopefully it will make the terrain look a lot more alien-like. It's exactly the same process as it was before. I just stippled the paint on very gently, and also very quickly. I then moved on to the tower, and I did the same there. Very quickly, very gently, and then finally I moved on to the spore vent. It's a very quick step, but hopefully at the end, when we do this shading, you'll be able to see that it does help. It does make the models look more interesting, and it does them make a lot more colourful. And when the stippling was finished, I then moved on to the next part of the process. The next colour that I'll be using is a Citadel contrast wash, and it's a thinned down version of Magos purple. And the brush I'll be using is an old worn out regiment brush from the army painter. For this contrast wash, I decided to thin down some Magos purple. I had a small tub of the Magos purple, which I poured into an empty bottle, as you can see here. I then added some more of the contrast medium to make a 50-50 mix, and I used that on the model. Applying the contrast wash is a very quick and it's a very easy process. I loaded the brush with the paint and then just began smearing it all over the fleshy parts that I had dry brushed the Fulgrim Pink colour earlier in the video. Now, you don't have to be too careful when applying a wash like this, but I would only recommend that you use an older brush, because I find the contrast paints are a little bit destructive to natural hair bristles. The contrast wash does a fantastic job in adding a rich and vibrant colour to the model. It also lets the colours underneath show through as well. You can see here that the two pink colours we stippled on earlier are looking vibrant, and the model's already got a fantastically alien look to it. Now, after the Gestation Sac was finished, I moved on to the capillary tower. I concentrated the wash onto the front fleshy parts of the model, and then I moved round to the vents at the back. Both parts got one very liberal coat of the wash, and finally I did the same with the spore vent. Now, just as before, it was given a generous dose of the thin down wash, and then I just let the pieces go completely dry. This is what it looks like now at the end, and then I moved on to the next colour. The next colour I'll be using is a Citadel colour. It's a shade paint, and it's called Berserker Bloodshade. And for the brush, I'll be using the Citadel medium shade brush. Now that the contrast wash has completely dried, I wanted to add another wash all over the carapace sections that we painted purple earlier. Now, applying this wash is just as easy as the other wash, but I had to be a lot more careful where the carapace meets the fleshy parts. I wanted a very tiny amount of the shade to kind of add a sort of gradient to the fleshy parts of the model, but what I did not want to do was for it to all spill over and then ruin the effect. And then while I was doing the claw sections at the bottom of the model, I decided to give the rocks and the debris a liberal coat of the bloodshade as well. And this is what it looks like after it's all been shaded, every part of the model. Next, I moved on to the capillary tower, and I gave this model a very liberal coat of the shade paint. And then finally, I went and I finished off the Spore vent model before I waited for all of the terrain pieces to be fully dried, and after it was all bone dry, I then moved on to the next colour. For the next colour, I'll be going back to the Citadel layer paint called Fulgrim Pink, and I'll be going back to using the small dry brush from Citadel. In this section, I'll be doing another dry brush. I'll be doing a dry brush of the fleshy parts of the model, but this time I'll be using a much smaller brush and only doing a light dry brush. It's the same process as before. You load some of the paint onto the brush, and then you use the palette to work it into the bristles, and then you wipe off the excess onto the kitchen roll. But this time, when I apply the dry brush, I want to be much more careful, and I just want to very gently flick it over the areas that we dry brushed earlier. I don't want to get it over the areas that we stippled in the pink horror colour, and I certainly don't want to get it over the parts of the model that we painted purple and washed with the Berserker Bloodshade. I found that a highlight dry brush is a very effective way of bringing out the details on a model, and it's also very, very quick. Now this piece here literally took about 30 seconds on each side, and then I moved on to the Capillary tower, which took about just as long, and then finally I moved on to the Spore vent, and that was super quick too. And after these pieces were dry brushed, I moved on to the next colour. For the next colour, we'll be going back to the Berserker Bloodshade, and for the brush, we'll be using the Citadel medium shade brush. For this section, I just wanted to very quickly go over all of the carapace areas again with the Bloodshade, because I wasn't very happy with the way they turned out, and I wanted them to be a bit darker and a bit more red. So I very quickly went over the Gestation Sac. Then I went back over the Capillary tower, and then finally I went over the Spore vent. I let them all go completely dry before I moved on to the next colour. For the next colour, I'll be using a Citadel base colour, and it's called Orruk Flesh, and for the brush I'll be using the character brush by the Army Painter. Now that all of the shading is dry, I wanted to move on and add some details to the model. This Orruk Flesh colour is a very nice contrast colour to make the model stick out, and I personally think it looks fantastic. Now I want to paint this colour deep into the recesses of this model, and hopefully it will give the look that the fleshy parts have got a really cool, vibrant, green, gooey liquid that's seeping out between the bulges of the Gestation Sac. And as you can see from this video, I'm applying a nice splodge of the paint deep into the channels between these pods that stick out. I don't want it to be too thick that it goes everywhere, but I want it to be visible and clearly be seen in all of the deep gaps. Now this is the model when it was finished. I was happy at this point. I thought it looks really, really cool, so then I moved on to the Capillary tower. For the Capillary tower, I wanted to add a contrast effect to the end of these spores on the back of the model. I wanted those parts to look like it was leaking and that it was oozing and full to the brim with this green alien gooey liquid. And then I did the same for the Spore vent piece as well. I applied a liberal coating of the paint all over the ends of the small vents at the sides, and then I moved on to the large vents at the top of the model. And after they were all painted, I let them dry, and then I moved on to the next colour. The next colour I'll be using is a Citadel colour technical paint, and it's called Nurgles Rot. And for the brush, I'll be using a cheap synthetic brush that I got from the hobby store for just a few pounds. To apply the Nurgles Rot technical paint, all I did was just go over all of the areas that I painted with the last green colour, but this time I just used it more sparingly, so it went over more of the bulging alien gestation pods. This technical paint's got a wonderful colour, and I think it really matches the Orruk Flesh that we used in the previous section. In fact, I chose the orange flesh because of how well it works with this technical paint. This paint is the paint that will really give the model that gooey and oozing alien fluid look to it. When it dries, it has a lovely glossy finish to it, and I think it looks absolutely brilliant. You can see here, it's going on superbly. It's just covering around the areas. I think it really does look superb. And for the Capillary tower, I did the same. I just splotched it all over the parts of the model that were painted green in the last chapter. And then I moved on to the Spore vent. and I did the same there. I just tried to get this done. I tried this on some test models before. I painted these models for the video, and when it dried, I think it looks absolutely just brilliant. And now it's on to the last colour for this Tyranid Infestation. The last colour that I'll be using is a Citadel layer colour, and it's called Ogryn Camo. And the brush I'll be using is the character brush from the Army Painter. The final step on this capillary tower is very, very easy, and it's very, very quick as well. I'll be using the Ogryn Camo to just very quickly give an edge highlight to each of the spores on the back of the capillary tower. And then finally, I'll do the same on all of the spores on the Spore Fent terrain piece as well. Here's the final showcase, guys. Now, it's been an absolute pleasure painting this Killzone upgrade Tyranid Infestation, and this model here, the Gestation Sac, has been my absolute favourite. I've also enjoyed painting everything else. Here's the capillary tower when it's finished. This was a great model to paint, and I'm sure it'll be great on the table as well. And finally, the Spore Vent. I mean, they're all brilliant. The whole terrain set's brilliant. I hope this video's given you guidance and inspiration. My name's Gar. Thank you for watching Let's Get Critical. Bye bye.